right, so let's get down to it today. So again, thank you for your commitment. I'm going to introduce our keynote this morning. So challenging people to help them achieve peak performance is at the heart of everything Urs Koenig does. After a championship career as a skier and a sky coach in Switzerland, he won numerous races and set several course records as an ultra endurance cyclist and ultra marathoner in races around the globe. I don't know, Urs, I'm already tired after reading that. So along the way, he served as a widely published professor at multiple universities in Switzerland, the US, and Australia. During his 20 years as an executive coach, Urs has coached hundreds of high-profile leaders and dozens of leadership teams across 3 continents, helping to evaluate their leadership from then to now. In 2017, Urs embarked on a new leadership adventure, serving as military peacekeeping commander in the NATO mission in the Balkans at age 50. Most recently, at age 54, he serves as a UN military peacekeeper in the Middle East. So I want to just pause to thank Urs for his service to our military.
Absolutely.
That's great. That's great. Urs is still a passionate ski mountaineering racer and is a loving father of 2 teenage boys who make commanding soldiers look easy. So that's great. Ladies and gentlemen, let's all welcome Urs Koenig to our discussion today. So thank you. Everybody have a great day.
As David's face slammed into the hard metal floor, he wondered if this was how it was all going to end. And soon it did. After what seemed like an eternity, David awoke in a hospital bed, not remembering how he got there. When asked, the doctors told him that he was unwilling to give up his seat and was dragged away violently by security officers. In the process, his head got slammed against armrests, his shoulders dislocated from the dragging as he was knocked unconscious. He now has permanent, irreversible brain damage. The incident was so violent, so visceral, that onlookers recorded it on their phones and uploaded it to social media. The reaction from the public? Outrage. So what happened? Frontline employees, gate agents, and security officers at United Airlines simply followed company protocol by removing a paying passenger. This seemingly innocuous action resulted not only in a public relations firestorm, it also caused a drop in corporate revenue. That's right, just one hastily, poorly made decision at the front lines caused corporate revenues to slide. It even cost the CEO the promotion to chairman. And just to be clear, while during the COVID crisis there were numerous passengers that deserved to be kicked off the planes because they were unruly, this was clearly not one of those cases. And while the outcome for David was tragic, the competition, of course, ruthlessly exploited the disaster at United Airlines with a bit of humor. While United's crisis might have been more visceral and bloody than what most of us are facing at OSF, this example clearly illustrates the increased speed, messiness, and interconnectedness of today's world and the challenges this presents to all of us. And I know I'm preaching to the choir when I talk to leaders in healthcare like yourselves, when I say that we used to have weeks and months to analyze the situation, develop a plan of action, communicate the plan of action, and then execute on the plan of action. Right now, in this very moment, our frontline people, our nurses, our doctors, our technicians are taking actions, are making decisions that could impact our businesses, OSF, for years to come. What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to lead in this messy, deeply interconnected world of ours? How can we shift from what we did back then to what we need to do now? Today, I'm so excited to share 5 fresh and unconventional ideas with you on how we can lead to win in this messy world of ours. I call them the 5 shifts of then to now leadership. The 5 shifts of then to now leadership. Why then to now, you might ask? Our world is changing at an alarming rate. Everything's changing. Our taste in fashion, our diets, how we interact with each other, how we work together. And then there's, of course, J-Lo, who never seems to change. With the world changing at an alarming rate, we can absolutely not rely on the same old models of doing business, the same old models of leading our teams and expect good outcomes. We need fresh, new, now leadership. Let me tell you why I'm so passionate about this. Over the last 35 years, I had the privilege to lead teams in the uber-competitive world of ultra-endurance competition to numerous wins and records. I've led teams in business, academia, and in complex international military peacekeeping operations around the globe. As an executive coach for the last 25 years, I helped hundreds of leaders and dozens of executive teams elevate their leadership from then to now. I'm not telling you this to boast. There's plenty more accomplished people on this call than me. I'm simply telling you this to let you know that I've seen firsthand what happens when we let go of outdated then leadership and embrace new, more relevant now leadership. Before we dive in, let's quickly review each of these shifts in turn. Shift number 1, the leadership funeral. Burying, letting go of outdated then leadership models and embracing new, more relevant now leadership. Shift number 2, radical transparency. In order for our frontline people to be truly empowered to make good, smart decisions, they need to know more. They need to know more about our intentions as leaders, our reasoning and rationale. And the only way they'll know more is if we as leaders, if we share more with radical transparency. Tough on results, tender on people, or as you call it at OSF, accountability and compassion is the ultimate yin-yang of leadership, having both high touch and high standards. Shift number 4, eyes on, hands off. From back then, micromanagement overstepping, to now empowering our people through leading with our eyes on, hands off. And lastly, becoming the champion of our culture. Truly driving, building, and taking responsibility for our culture. Now leadership doesn't only apply to the business world. It also applies to our communities, our families, even our government. In fact, one of the traditionally most top-down and bureaucratically organized branches of the federal government has actually been at the forefront of some of these shifts. Who might that be, you ask? The US military. On the eve of September 30th, 2004, then 4-star General Stanley McChrystal, in the foreground here, was sitting at Balad Air Base in Iraq. There, surrounded by his top team, is where he received the news about the most devastating suicide attack yet. Just 60 miles south from where he was sitting, 2 cars had sped into a huge crowd gathered for the opening of a sewer plant. 35 children now lay dead. Over the seemingly never-ending working hours and sleepless nights that followed, Stan McChrystal came to this painful realization. Al-Qaeda in Iraq was unlike any other terror organization of the past. Instead, it was a decentralized network that could move swiftly, strike ruthlessly, and then seemingly vanish in the local population. The Allied forces had huge advantages in terms of numbers, training, and equipment, yet none of it seemed to matter. McChrystal turned to his team and asked, why is it that if we're the best of the best, that these attacks keep increasing? Why do innocent civilians keep getting killed? Why do children keep dying? Why? One thing was clear to McChrystal. His task force was led and organized in a very siloed way with top-down command control structures and lots of centralized decision-making. This outdated then leadership structure made the task force too slow to respond to a nimble now enemy. This outdated then leadership structure cost the Allied forces hundreds of lives and was about to cost them the war on terror. But McChrystal saw a way out. He had the humility to recognize that he needed to change the way he led and structured his task force. He needed to move from back then silos, or as he put it, leading like a chess master, controlling his pawns on the chessboard, to now leading like a gardener. Yes, a gardener. You see, as a gardener, you can't actually make plants grow. Much like none of us at OSF, we can't actually make our people do stuff. But what we can and what we must do when we lead like a gardener is plant the right seedlings at the right time in the right spot, provide a nurturing environment by watering, weeding, keeping pests out, so that our plants, our people can flourish. McChrystal moved from back then leading like a chess master to now leading like a gardener who provided the right environment, the right culture, so that his troops became better informed and his frontline operators could execute more swiftly, more precisely, more independently. As a direct result of these then to now shifts, the task force became measurably more effective. Al-Qaeda's ability to strike was reduced by a factor of 17. I'm telling you the story for one key reason. Elevating our leadership from then to now is within the reach of all of us at OSF. Clearly, McChrystal is a gifted leader, but he would be the first one to admit that he's no superhuman, if it is possible to elevate our leadership in the midst of a grueling war across an organization of thousands of people spread over 100+ locations on 3 continents, then doing exactly that. Elevating our leadership from then to now is within the reach of all of us. And the best part is, we don't need to have a fancy title or lead a large organization to benefit from these shifts. It's the small things within the reach of all of us we can do right now. How we listen to our teenagers now. How we hold our team members accountable now. How we conduct our one-on-ones, our department meetings now. These small shifts within the reach of all of us, when done consistently, leading to excellence. Now leadership will help OSF's bottom line. And I know financial viability in the healthcare field is crucially important. It's very important. But maybe even more important is this. Elevating our leadership from then to now can make a difference in our families, our communities, and yes, at OSF. It can make us better fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, and siblings. And by making our families, our communities, and OSF a better place, we are indeed making the world a better place. And that is my mission and my calling, making our own small contribution towards a better world. Now leadership makes for better leaders, makes for a better world. Before we dive in, let me give you a little roadmap for our time together this morning. I will now in turn present the 5 shifts to you. At the end of each shift, we'll do a brief 5-minute application exercise in your rooms. So I'm asking you to work with your neighbor where you're sitting. For those of us by ourselves, I'm asking you to do the exercise as well as you can by yourself. And I'm counting on the room leads to bring people back after the 5 minutes. Throughout my presentation, we'll do a little leadership trivia. I will put up photos and pictures of leaders who successfully implemented the shift that I just talked about. And to get the blood flowing, some energy out there, like just shout out, who do you see on the screen, if you know it. Towards the end of our time together, we do a more extensive leadership feed-forward sprint exercise. I'll explain what we're going to do when we get there. Just for now, think about the fact that during that exercise, you'll work with a personal goal, a personal leadership goal you have. So as you listen to our presentation today, and as you think about some of the goals you might have had in the past around becoming a better leader, that's the goal that you can work with during that leadership feed-forward sprint. So here, who is this? Of course, I can't hear you, but this is J-Lo's husband, of course, Ben Affleck, proving that I love leadership, I'm passionate about leadership, and occasionally I'm semi-knowledgeable about my pop culture as well. Great, let's dive in. Shift number 1, the leadership funeral. Even though we all know how bad smoking is for you, Still, roughly a fifth of the population smokes, with all the health consequences we're so familiar with: heart disease, lung disease, cancer, stroke. Roughly 5 million deaths per year are caused by smoking. Against this backdrop, imagine for a second that you're in your business. You're in the healthcare business. You're in the business of keeping people healthy and healing the sick. But you at the same time directly contribute towards these smoking-related deaths by selling cigarettes. In fact, you're selling $2 billion worth of tobacco products every year. This is exactly the situation that the pharmacy retail giant CVS found itself in for years. What to do? In 2014, CVS made a bold move and decided to discontinue selling tobacco products. The move was by no means a no-brainer. All major competitors are selling tobacco products to this day. CVS was walking away from $2 billion worth in revenue. The short-term revenue hit proved worth it though, as hiring and retaining talent at CVS has become much easier, as millennials rallied around the cause. And despite the short-term revenue hit, CVS was able to more than double its revenue since 2014. By discontinuing selling tobacco products, CVS truly embraced the notion of a leadership funeral. In the process, the company had the guts and the wisdom to let go of outdated then values, then leadership, and embrace new, more relevant now leadership. CVS held a leadership funeral, buried the sale of tobacco to make room for bigger and better things. Better profitability, better brand awareness, more engaged employees. As the great management thinker Peter Drucker has said, if you want something new, you have to stop doing something old. Big corporations can hold leadership funerals, but so can all of us on this call. We all can have the guts and the wisdom to let go of outdated then leadership and embrace new, more relevant now leadership. A few years ago, I was invited to my client Linda's leadership funeral. It was a light-hearted celebration. Her husband was there, some friends, most of her colleagues from work. Fortunately, we didn't bury Linda at all. She was very much alive. Instead, we buried some of Linda's leadership traits and behaviors that stopped being useful to her. You see, Linda started out as an analyst, and she was stellar at it. She was detail-oriented, knew all the facts, worked superbly independently. So what happened? Of course, she gets rapidly promoted and in no time was in charge of a department of 50 people. But becoming a boss did not come easy to Linda because she was so detail-oriented. She was such a great analyst. She tended to micromanage, overstep, take projects back. It got so bad that at one stage or another, most of her team members were really annoyed with her and people started to leave her team. That's when we started to work together. Over the next 8 months, Linda did the deep hard work of deep introspection and constantly asking for feedback and feed-forward suggestions for the future on how to get better. And over time, was able to slowly turn the ship around. Now, Linda spends 80% of her time in meetings and gets stuff done through her people. Much like all of us on this call, Linda needed to move from back then, doing it all herself, to now delegating. And I know, delegating is neither a new nor a sexy concept. And yet, it is still the concept that so many of us as leaders struggle with. So Linda, much like all of us, needed to move from back then, doing it all herself, to now delegating. Linda's leadership funeral was a symbolic act of letting go of what was back then to embrace new, more relevant now leadership. Linda faced what many of us are facing. What got you here won't get you there. The very things that got us and made us successful up to this day might actually be in the way of going to the next level. Little hint, remember the author here. Google gets it. Every time a project is discontinued at Google, it's a time to celebrate. Why? Somebody had the guts and the wisdom to say no and kill a project, and as a result, what? As a result, resources are freed up. But Google takes a step further. They created a graveyard for all their killed apps, products, and services. At killedbygoogle.com, you find a eulogy for all of these killed products, apps, and services. Do you remember, for example, the Google Glasses? There were plenty of security and privacy issues associated with the Google Glasses, leading users to be called glass holes. I didn't say that, glass holes. If your user is called a glass hole, it might be a great time to discontinue the product, as Google did, ruthlessly killing Google Glasses in 2015. How might we apply the leadership funnel to our own lives? All of us, we have habits and thoughts in our personal lives, and systems and procedures at OSF we've been doing for years. Let's ask ourselves, does this still serve me well now and beyond, or is it time to celebrate it for what it was, bury it to make room for bigger, more relevant now leadership? It might come as a surprise to us, but elevating our leadership from then to now does not necessarily mean adding more to our to-do list. It might actually mean taking things off or keeping a stop-doing list. What goes on a stop-doing list, you might ask? Items can range from stop attending that time suck meeting at work, stop producing or asking for that monthly report nobody reads anyway, to stop sitting on that non-for-profit board we didn't have the heart to say no to. Items on our stop-doing list are things we do out of habit, frankly, sometimes intellectual laziness, or worse, guilt. Even though the concept of stop doing things is very simple, it can be hard for us to say no to somebody or something. As humans, and as humans in healthcare, as mission partners at OSF, we want to help, we want to please, we want to support, we want to add value. And saying no to somebody or something goes against the social grain. But to truly live a life true to our values versus a life others expect from us, to truly lean into our best personal and professional future now selves, starts with stop doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons so we have time and energy for what really matters. Shift number one, the leadership funnel. From back then, doing it that way because we've always done it that way, to now keeping a stop doing list. Here is the next leadership trivia. Which movie is this? People of my generation, of course, know that this is 4 Weddings and a Funeral. And who is this gentleman? You just saw his book before. This is Marshall Goldsmith, executive coach guru and author of the outstanding book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which I recommend to all of us in leadership. And who is this? This is Australian hospice nurse Bronnie Ware, the author of the outstanding book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. Why do I put this up here? One of the top regrets that Bronnie found when she interviewed people in hospice about their lives was this: I wish I had the guts and the courage to live a life true to my values versus a life others expect from us. So now we'll go into our first application exercise, 5 minutes. Spend a minute to think about what's one thing that needs to go on your stop doing list. Write it down and then share and commit to the person next to you. I'll start a timer here and we'll continue after 5 minutes with the presentation. I know you're busy in your rooms talking to your neighbors. We're gonna wrap it up here, and the room leads, please bring the room back. Laura hung up the phone as Poole entered her office. He closed the door slowly and deliberately and sat down and asked, "Did you hear about the employee salary spreadsheet?" Laura had no idea what he was talking about. HR accidentally sent an all-company email with everybody's compensation data attached. Laura's eyes widened. She gasped, "No, yes." She immediately turned to her laptop, opened up the email, and sure enough, there it was. All-company email from HR with everybody's compensation data attached. She double-clicked to open. Paul got up to have a look. And then Laura exclaimed, "I can't believe it. Melissa's making 10 grand more than me, even though she has less responsibility." And Paul chimed in, "And look at John, 15 grand more, even though he doesn't own a P&L. Laura and Paul reacted exactly the same way as everybody else did at the company. Needless to say, that the days and weeks that followed were unpleasant, as everybody was stewing over how everybody else was making more than what they deserve. Clearly, we're uncomfortable sharing compensation data, as in this example, by accident or on purpose. But let's ask ourselves why? No, really, why? The main reason we cringe openly sharing compensation data is because we fear the reaction of our people. And the main reason, or one of the main reasons why we fear the reaction of our people, is if we have an outdated, unfair, biased compensation system. But there's another way. The social media marketing company Buffer publishes on their website for everybody to see the formula they use to calculate the salaries of each of their positions. Among other things, the variables going into the formula are the location of the position and the skill level of the candidate, from beginner to intermediate to advanced. And I understand at OSF you actually have a similar initiative going at the moment. But Buffer takes a step further. They publish on their website for everybody to see the actual salaries of each of their employees. At one glance, we can see the highest paid employee is Maria, the chief product officer, who's actually getting paid a bit more than the CEO, who happens to live in Denver at just under $300,000. The lowest paid employee is Malina, not shown here. She lives in the tiny Asian country of Brunei. The benefits of this approach to Buffer? According to people who work at the company, higher trust and accountability, as people hold themselves and each other to higher standards, along the lines of, if everybody else knows I'm making $300,000, I need to provide at least that value. Radical transparency changes the quality of the conversation around the workplace. From back then, petty jealousy, to now, my own skills, my own contribution. In Buffer's case, from back then, I need to make at least as much as Melissa, to now, or at OSF, for example, to now, hey boss, you're assessing me as an intermediate nurse. I think I should be an advanced nurse, and here is why. From back then, petty jealousy, to now, my own skills, my own contribution. And here is what happens when we lead with radical transparency. Our people feel it, they sense it, they know when it's the real authentic you talking, no pretense. We're all drawn to transparent authenticity. The CEO of Costco, Greg Chelnick, is a prime example of a truly transparent and authentic leader. He regularly gets standing ovation at all company meetings, even when delivering the hardest of news. Why? As anybody at Costco will tell you, at Costco, we clap for the truth. Now, we might not be in a position just yet at OSF to openly share all our salaries, and yet we all can and must lead with more transparency. For our frontline people, for our teams to really be empowered to make good, smart decisions at the front lines, they need to know more. They need to know more about our intentions, our reasoning, and our rationale. And the only way they'll know more is if we share more, if we share more with radical transparency. So how do we do it? Here's one quick tool, the 5 whys. I bet many of you are actually familiar with the 5 whys, a technique originally developed in manufacturing. In order to get from the symptom to the root cause of a problem, you ask the question why 5 times. Here, I'm suggesting a different application. Asking, discussing, and sharing the 5 whys behind our decisions as leaders helps us to be radically transparent around our reasoning, our rationale, our assumptions behind the decision. So let's look at an example. Let's assume we as leaders decided to hire a new team member, a new brand manager. At the next team meeting, we share the 5 whys behind our decision of hiring a new brand manager. Why? Because our workload is going to increase significantly. Why? Because we're starting a new rebrand push. Why? Because our branding is out of date. Why? Because we let our branding slide. Why? Because we solely focused on social media outreach and didn't make branding enough of a priority. In 5 whys, we went from decision to underlying reasoning, rationale, and assumptions behind the decision. And in the process, we're able to gain buy-in and quite possibly even enthusiasm for our decision. Shift number 2, radical transparency. From back then, secrecy and avoidance, to now being radically transparent, sharing the 5 whys behind our decisions. And who is this? This is now President of Marshall University, Brad Smith, former CEO of Intuit, the company that owns QuickBooks and Mint financial softwares. Why do I put this up here? Brad Smith lived radical transparency by how he shared the results of his 360s. Not unlike your mission partner survey, Brad Smith did a 360. A 360 is an anonymous survey where a leader gets assessed by his or her peers, direct reports, and the boss. Most people don't share the results of their personal 360, but Brad Smith did. He sent an all-company email to everybody in the company as the CEO, sharing the results of his personal 360, and he even taped the results of his 360 to his office door. Brad Smith was radically transparent around his strength and, yes, his weaknesses, his development potential, sharing with the whole company and making it therefore okay for everybody for them also to share both their strength and their weaknesses. And everybody knows who this is. That's right, 16th President of the US, Abraham Lincoln. I now wish to make the personal acknowledgement that you were right and I was wrong. Radical transparency also means owning our mistakes and taking responsibility for them, as Lincoln did here in a letter to one of his generals, acknowledging that he, Lincoln, was wrong and the general was indeed right. And we all know who this is, unfortunately we do. That's right, COVID-19. Make no mistake, COVID-19 made you walk through fire in healthcare. I understand. I'm not sure I really understand. I can relate maybe to some extent what you've been going through. But COVID-19 actually did also something in terms of transparency that's positive. If you would have asked anyone in a professional setting, in a work setting, in January of 2020, how are you? You got 2 responses, either great or fine, even if we weren't great or fine. Fast forward a few months into March, April of 2020, you ask somebody, how are you? You first got a big sigh, and then an actual response around the struggles of homeschooling, the struggles of not being able to see our elderly parents. COVID-19 was a catalyst for us to share more transparently, and with more vulnerability and humility what's really going on in our lives. We'll now go into our next application exercise. For 5 minutes, take a minute to think about what is your 5 why decision. What decision would you like to share the 5 whys with your team? Take a minute to think about this by yourself and then share with the person next to you. We'll do this for 5 minutes again. Shift number 3, tough on results, tender on people. Tough on results, tender on people means holding our people to the highest standards while building meaningful and trusting relationships with them. Being both tough and tender, having both high touch and high standards, accountability and compassion is the ultimate yin-yang of leadership. Dale Carnegie makes the concept come alive beautifully with a story about the test pilot Bob Hoover. Bob Hoover was returning from an air show in LA back to his home base in San Diego, when all of a sudden, mid-air, the engine of the World War II propeller plane stopped working. With some deft maneuvering, he was able to emergency land the plane, but it was badly damaged. Fortunately, neither he nor his 2 passengers were injured. Upon exiting the aircraft, the first course of action Hoover took was to inspect the fuel of the World War II propeller plane. And just as he suspected, the World War II propeller plane was filled with jet fuel versus gasoline. Upon returning to his home base in San Diego, Hoover asked to speak to the mechanic who serviced this plane. The young man was sick with agony. Tears streamed down his face. He just had caused the loss of an expensive aircraft. He could have caused the loss of 3 lives. Nobody would have blamed Hoover for ripping into the mechanic for his carelessness. But Hoover did none of that. Instead, he put his big arm around the mechanic's shoulder, looked at him sternly and said, "To show you that I'm sure you'll never ever do this again, I want you to serve my F-51 tomorrow." By choosing this calm, empathetic, yet very to the point way of communicating, Hoover made it safe for the mechanic to own his mistake and make good on it. Toughened results, tender on people, holding people accountable with compassion. One of the most powerful ways to turn our teams into a culture of toughened results and tender on people is to turn our teams into leadership factories, making it the explicit goals for each of our teams to produce the next generation of leaders at OSF. Many of us might be a bit reluctant to fully embrace this notion. Won't people leave if we make them even more employable? The ironic truth, of course, is this. By stretching our people to the highest standards, we hold on to them longer. Yes, challenging and stretching our people to go to the next level actually induces loyalty. Turning our teams into a leadership factory, becoming the leader, the employer of choice, induces loyalty. By holding to the highest standards, by preparing for the next level, by holding them accountable for toughened results, by deeply and personally caring about their career path, we're tender on people, we're compassionate. As far as the leadership factory is concerned, the Ritz-Carlton is the cream of the crop. The Ritz opened its doors in 1983, and from the very first day they opened their doors, they embraced the notion of a leadership factory. Each team has the explicit goal to produce the next generation of leaders for the Ritz. As a result, many of the senior leaders at the Ritz first started at the Ritz, and many of the senior leaders across the hospitality and tourism industry first spread their wings at the Ritz. The president of the Ritz-Carlton, Hervé Hamler, tells the story about the wheelchair-bound young man who checked into the Ritz-Carlton in Dubai together with his family. Upon looking through the massive glass windows of the lobby down to the ocean, he took one look at the beach, turned to his family, and said, "I sure wish I could swim in that ocean." The problem was that between the hotel and the sea lay a 50-meter stretch of soft sand over which the wheelchair impossibly could travel, hence crushing the young man's dream to swim in the ocean. Within earshot of the family was a maintenance worker who overheard the conversation, and she thought, "I'm going to do something about it." She quickly rounded up 6 other maintenance workers, and voila, a mere 7 hours later, there was the masterpiece, a brand new wooden walkway down to the ocean over which the wheelchair now could easily travel. For the team members at the Ritz-Carlton in Dubai, it was simply another day as part of the leadership factory at the Ritz. For the young man, it was the first time he ever swam in an ocean. What the Ritz is most proud about is that nobody needs to tell its employees to do these things. Nobody told the maintenance worker she needed to build a walkway to the ocean. Instead, the Ritz has built a leadership factory culture where each employee is challenged to go to the next level. Top service, growth from within, team members that inspire each other. That's the leadership factory at the Ritz. It's foundational to creating memories that last a lifetime, so that guests don't just stay at the Ritz, but the Ritz stays with them long after they check out. How can we make it operational? How can we bring it back to all of us? Here is one suggestion we can all do and implement immediately. Let's start holding regular career path meetings with each of our team members. And I'm not actually talking about the official HR-driven career path. So I call them flight check-in meetings. Simply grab an informal cup of coffee and ask, "Hey Karen, it's been a while since we talked about your career. Are you still thinking XYZ?" During these meetings, we can ask these questions which are never asked enough by leaders. Where do you see yourself in a year, in 3 and 5? How can you achieve this here at OSF? What do you need to know? And maybe most importantly, who do you need to know? Shift number 3, toughen results, tender on people, the ultimate yin-yang of leadership, turning our teams into leadership factories to produce the next generation of leaders for OSF through regular flight check-in meetings. Next leadership trivia. Who's this? This is Kim Scott, author and former tech executive, author of the outstanding book, Radical Candor. Be a kick-ass boss without losing your humanity. Scott has really popularized the notion of toughen results, tender people, accountability, compassion in her book, Radical Candor, which I recommend to all of you. She worked at Google, Facebook, and Apple, among other places. Great book. And who is this? Everybody knows who this is, right? This is, of course, that's right, former Secretary of State, Colin Powell, who unfortunately passed away early this year from COVID. Powell had some great leadership principles. In the area of being tough on results, there's some salty language. I'm not going to share those. But Powell also was tender on people. He would say, the day your soldiers stop bringing you their problems is the day you stop leading them. They either concluded that you don't care or you're unable or unwilling to help. And both is a failure in leadership. The day your soldiers stop bringing you their problems, the day your nurses, your doctors, your staff stops bringing you their problems is the day you stop leading them. We will now go into our next application exercise. And then we will take a quick break, actually. So here's what I want you to do. We all fall naturally on this continuum between tough results and tender on people. Nobody's perfect and encompasses both. So where do you fall more? What's your tendency? Are you more tender on people or more tough on results? And what's the one thing you can do to move from or to and? Have a think about this and share it with the person next to you. After you're done with this, we will take a 10-minute break. I'm asking you to get up, stretch, and actually gather your things, walk around, say hi to somebody you haven't said hi to, and take a different seat. So you sit next to somebody new after the 10-minute break. But first, we go into the application exercise, and then we'll do a 5-minute break, and I'm asking you to move around. Shift number 4, eyes on, hands off. It was a glorious spring morning in Boston. The then governor of Massachusetts, Devil Patrick, had a thing of rare beauty as a public official, a day without official appointments. It was late morning, he just finished a workout and was driving home. That's when his head of emergency management called from the finish line of the Boston Marathon. Governor, we have horrific scenes, a terrible disaster. We need you to come down. We need to set up a command center. We can all remember how we felt when we first heard the news about the Boston Marathon bombing. How we felt vulnerable, helpless, maybe even angry, and how we felt for those who lost loved ones and those who suffered grave injuries. We can all remember that. But what most of us are less familiar with is the highly effective response to the Boston Marathon bombing. It's exemplified by how Governor Patrick entered the command center each and every time. Instead of telling people what to do, he would ask, how can I help? The governor's tone, leadership tone, spread through all response teams and agencies, a tone of deferring responsibility and giving control and authority to those best suited for the task. Governor Patrick was keenly aware of the very common then leadership trap we fall in during crisis. The then leadership trap to micromanage in order to feel in control. The then leadership trap to grab the reins, yank, and overstep into areas best handled by specialists. But leading with his eyes on, hands off, did not mean being passive for Governor Patrick. He realized he could add the most value as a trusted communicator of government, giving people hope and serving as a trusted intermediary to the White House. And he continued to enter the command center each and every time, asking, how can I help? Fortunately, most of us will never have to lead through such a horrific experience. And yet, there is a lesson for all of us at OSF here. Our fast-moving, messy, complex world requires quick action at the front lines, much like during disaster response. With the world changing by the day, sometimes by the hour, our teams do not have time to feed a question up the org chart and wait for a response back. They need to move and act fast and in the moment. It might seem counterintuitive, but the faster things move, the more complex our world becomes, the more we need to give up control and authority. The faster things move, the more complex our world becomes, the more we need to empower and delegate. How do we do that? One thing we absolutely need to have in order to lead with our eyes on, hands off is clarity of shared purpose. Rather than seeking control, we seek clarity of shared purpose. How do we get there? Here's one quick hack we can all implement immediately with our teams to arrive at shared purpose. Ask this simple yet crucial question together with your team. What is the one thing we need to do extraordinarily well around here in order to win? What's the one thing? For Governor Patrick, it was save lives. For Zappos, for example, best customer service. For Costco, lowest price. The point is this: clarity of shared purpose can be simple, tangible, and provide clear marching orders for each of our team members. Leading with our eyes on, hands off through clarity of shared purpose then means leading like a compass, showing true north versus providing a detailed map on how to get there. Leading like a compass, showing true north versus providing a detailed map on how to get there. Let me share with you one thing I implemented in all the positions I've ever held to ensure that my teams would work well without me. When I was commanding peacekeepers in Kosovo in the Balkans, I never felt nervous about leaving my team by themselves, be it for a day of meetings at HQ or for a well-deserved leave with my boys back in Seattle. Why? I knew my team was set up for success without me. How did we get there? Short answer, I had my team members learn from others up and down and across the peacekeeping force. Let me give an example. One of the daily deliverables of my teams were so-called daily situation reports, or DSRs. These DSRs summarize the findings from the last 24 hours and were due at HQ every day at 1700 hours. The recipient of our DSRs were staff officers at HQ. I call them our clients. I had my team members shadow these staff officers for a day or two. By working alongside them, by getting to know each other, my team members gained an in-depth understanding about the pain points and needs of these staff officers, our clients. And as a result, the quality of our deliverables, our DSRs, improved significantly. Equally, if not more importantly, by spending time together, by enjoying Arabic coffee after lunch, having a drink after work, my team members and these staff officers developed a personal relationship. And as a direct result, cooperation between my teams and HQ improved significantly. On a broader level, having my team members learn from others up and down and across the peacekeeping force made them better at understanding the big strategic environment we're operating in. And then, crucially importantly, as a result of that improved understanding, made them better at making good, smart, independent decisions at the front lines. Most importantly, it removed me as the bottleneck, as the sole strategic decision maker, as the sole liaison to HQ. So then, when I was sitting in my seat on the plane in Pristina, Kosovo, to take off to see my boys back in Seattle, I knew my team was set up for success without me. How might we all create learning opportunities for our team members outside their immediate area of expertise? Maybe it's shadow somebody for an hour or two. Maybe it's take part in a meeting they're not normally a part of, or simply having coffee or lunch with somebody outside of our department. Shift number 4, eyes on, hands off. From back then, micromanagement, overstepping, through now empowered execution at the front lines through clarity of shared purpose and having our team members learn from others up and down and across OSF. Leadership trivia. Which country is this? We all know this, right? This is, of course, that's right, Ukraine. Why do I put this up? one of the main reasons why the Ukrainian armed forces are able to hold back a much mightier and more powerful Russian army is because of their empowered execution at the front lines, the decentralized decision making. It's exemplified by how one company commander actually put it. I get to decide if and how I engage the enemy. These are the words of a mechanized infantry company commander of the Ukrainian armed forces. I get to decide. Compare this to the highly centralized Russian army, where the smallest decisions have to be fed up all the way to the general, sometimes to the president, and then everybody has to wait for a response back. And just to be clear, NATO support, intelligence, heavy weapons, of course, also play a role, but crucially important, empowered execution at the front lines. And somebody from your field, who is this? I think his name is actually on his coat there. This is Dr. Gary Kaplan, former CEO of Virginia Mason Hospitals in Seattle. Kaplan was the first healthcare leader in the 1990s who implemented the Toyota method in healthcare. What did he do to make this change initiative successful? He took his whole top team, all senior management, and a couple of board members for a 2-week learning trip to Japan. He knew that for the change initiative of implementing the Toyota system in healthcare, for that to be successful, top management doesn't only need to understand intellectually what it means, but actually experientially learn and experience what it means to implement that change. To this day, board members need to travel to Japan every other year in order to be eligible for reappointment to the board. And our fashion friends, which company is this? This, of course, is Nordstrom's. Why did I put Nordstrom up? Nordstrom leads with their eyes on, hands off by having their employee handbook have one page, one rule. Our one rule, use good judgment in all situations. That's the number one rule, the only page in their employee handbook. Nordstrom hires the best people, has a clear shared purpose, superior customer service, and then lets people run free and empower through a one rule employee handbook. We will actually skip the application exercise because we started a bit late and the technical issues we had. So we'll skip that. We go right to the next shift. Shift number 5, champion of the culture. What does it take for our teams to perform at the highest level in today's messy, fast-moving world? Let's really think about this. What makes for a great now team today and beyond? I bet many of us immediately think about having the best and brightest team members on the team. And it's true. If we want to perform, we need talent and expertise. In Jim Collins's words, we need to have the right people on the bus. Does this mean the more talent, the more expertise, the more stars on a team, the better? The surprising truth is no. You can actually have too many stars on a team. Lots of stars means lots of ego, means lots of infighting, and that sort of makes intuitive sense. Research out of INSEAD and Columbia clearly shows that an NBA team is better off with 2 stars versus 4, and the soccer team is better off with 3 stars versus 6. The research on team effectiveness is crystal clear. It's more important how a team works together, the culture of a team versus who's on the team. Despite the very real war on terror, the very real war on talent we're all facing, culture is still underrated. The news reporter wasn't quite clear she heard correctly, so she asked again. Fire Captain David, what do you attribute your success to again? The news reporter was expecting something a bit more substantial, explaining Fire Captain David's success. His firehouse had just won an award for best performance across a vast variety of criteria commonly used in firefighting. But no, Fire Captain David meant what he said. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. We eat all our meals together. Cooking and eating together is an integral part of our activities at the firehouse. In fact, my firemen who start the shift at 6 p.m. eat 2 dinners, one at home with their family and one with us at the firehouse. We cook, we laugh, we get to know each other. Maybe it's a primate thing, he said. But I have no doubt that cooking and eating together makes us a better team. We might be as surprised about this statement as the news reporter was. And yet, his statement, Fire Captain David's statement, is backed up by academic studies. Research clearly shows a correlation between teams that cook and eat together and higher performance on the job. The simple tasks that underpin meal planning, communication, collaboration, translate into high performance on the job. And by the way, the findings have been replicated in hospitals. Surgery teams that eat together in the cafeteria versus doctors with doctors, nurses with nurses, technicians with technicians perform significantly better in the operating theater with, of course, the most important outcome, improved patient outcome. Does this now mean we all need to run back and take cooking classes with our team members? No, it doesn't. But it does mean this. As now leaders, we are the drivers, the builders, the champions of our culture. All too often, the advice on how to become a great leader focuses on individual leadership excellence, vision, passion, follow-through. But to truly turn our teams into high-performing units, we need to drive, build, and champion the culture. We are the champions of the culture. And what's one of the most powerful ways to do exactly that? It is to create a culture of psychological safety. And just to be clear, psychological safety does not mean holding hands, standing around in a circle, singing Kumbaya. Psychological safety is a culture where people feel safe to ask questions, raise concerns, raise doubts without fear of being belittled, shamed, or worse, risking their career. One of the most successful and competitive tech companies in the world has done the most extensive empirical research to date on what makes a highly successful team. The widely published research by Google clearly shows that the culture of psychological safety is the best predictor for the performance of any team. It's more important than who's on the team, the tenure of the team, the size, if it's virtual or in person. A culture of psychological safety. Mathilda was nervous, very nervous. She peeked through the curtain into the light to make out her loved ones, but the lights were too bright, she couldn't see. Soon, she would be on in the classical musical Les Miserables as Cosette. The air behind the curtain was hot and sticky, nerves. Her chest tightened. She tried the breathing exercises, but if anything, it made it worse. And then, ready or not, nervous or not, her cue came. She stepped out onto the stage, into the light, and from the very first line, delighted the crowd. Despite her nerves, and to nobody's surprise, Mathilda pulled off a superb performance, so much so that the crowd sent them away at the end of the night with a lengthy, thundering standing ovation. Mathilda was over the moon. Later that night, over drinks, she turned to her fellow actors. She turned to her COO, her director of marketing and the sales team, and said, and you know what the crazy thing was? I was more nervous than before the important investor meeting last week. Investor meeting, CEO. You see, Mathilda and her ensemble are not your typical actors. During the day, they run a company together, Front, a workflow application. And once per year, the whole team, every single employee, puts on a musical. This year, it was Les Miserables with Mathilda as Cosette. Why on earth would the CEO and co-founder put herself through such a nerve-wracking experience? Why on earth? Short answer, psychological safety. Practicing and performing a musical together provides an environment where we can practice the core element, as Google has found and numerous other companies have confirmed, of any high-performing team. Practicing and performing a musical together provides an environment where people have to be vulnerable, take risks, make mistakes, try, fail, try again, and finally improve. No matter if they're acting, singing, playing an instrument, or narrating, it brings the team together. Back then, for those people of my generation, do you remember the Trust Falls? Back then, it was Trust Falls. Now it's putting on a musical. And the track record for Front speaks for itself. Acquisition of 7,000 customers, closing the books on its first acquisition and $140 million worth in funding. Now, putting on a musical is of course not for everybody. And yet we can all take small steps to shift our culture towards a culture of psychological safety. So what's one small thing we can all do? Let's share a meaningful personal or professional goal with our team members. It can be anything. It could be running a half marathon, losing 20 pounds, becoming a better dad. I could use that, or a better delegator or listener at work. The important thing is it's a meaningful personal and professional goal. Let's share what it is, why it's important to us, and how we plan to achieve it. By sharing a meaningful personal goal with our team members, we display some vulnerability and some humility, two of the cornerstones of a culture of psychological safety. Shift number 5, champion of the culture. From back then, solely focusing on talent, to now champion the culture of psychological safety through sharing a meaningful personal goal. Leadership trivia number 13. What do the corporate scandals of these 3 businesses have in common? I just talked about it. A lack of what? A lack of psychological safety. The Dieselgate scandal at VW, where they faked the software so that the cars would pass the strict emission standards in the US. The Boeing Max disaster, resulting in 2 planes crashing, everybody dying on board. The Wells Fargo sales scandal. In all 3 cases, a top-down command control, heavy-handed leadership would communicate to staff members at VW, if you can't find a way to meet the emission standards, we will find somebody who will. At Boeing, if you can't meet the aggressive production schedule, we will find somebody who can. At Wells Fargo, if you can't meet the sales targets, the unrealistic sales targets, we will find somebody who will. In all 3 cases, a lack of psychological safety made it impossible for frontline people, for staff members to voice their legitimate concerns and questions up the chain. A lack of psychological safety, quite literally, can actually cost lives. And who is this? I had him up earlier. This, of course, is Peter Drucker, the great management thinker. By the way, if for those of you who are interested in management literature, every time we think of a great idea we just came up with, go and read Peter Drucker, because he probably thought about this already in the 1960s. But he famously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We can have the best plans, the most thought through strategy. If our culture isn't a culture of psychological safety, we quite literally go nowhere. Culture eats strategy for breakfast all day, every day. And again, in the interest of time, we will actually skip over this exercise, so we have a bit more time for our last exercise, the feed forward exercise. Let me sort of tie together, bring it back for you with a final story that encompasses all of the 5 then to now leadership shifts. In the mid-1990s, 4 interns were arrested in support of the California headwater forest threatened by harvesting. All 4 interns landed in jail. Now, especially you HR people, what would you do if 4 of your interns landed in jail? No, really, what would you do? Many of us, some of us, would probably fire them. But even if we didn't fire them, we probably wouldn't do what their company did for them. Their company posted their bail, kept paying them while they were in jail, and paid their legal fees. And stunningly, it's not a one-off. It's in fact company policy to post bail for employees who get arrested in support of non-violent environmental causes. Why? The company wants its people to truly be who they are and stand up for what they believe in. Now, if you think that that's just some cute hippie endeavor, you'd be dead wrong. Unconventional? Absolutely. Pushing the boundaries? You bet. Leaning into new possibilities? Absolutely. The business is a success story if there ever was one. From its very modest beginnings in 1957, it's grown to $1 billion in revenue, 3,000 employees, a global footprint. It even made its founder a billionaire. The outdoor apparel company Patagonia and its founder Yvon Chouinard achieved all this by applying themselves to the 5-10 to now shifts. Patagonia truly embraces the leadership funeral by constantly burying and reinventing how stuff is done. And in the process, they've become the envy of the competition. Patagonia has a no advertising policy, except they broke their no advertising policy once. One Black Friday, they took out the memorable full-page ad in the New York Times that read, "Don't buy this jacket." The ad's text breaks down the environmental footprint of its then best-selling fleece jacket R2 and asks consumers to think twice before buying it or any other jacket. The ad hit 2 home runs simultaneously. It shines a light on the environmental footprints of our purchases, something that Patagonia truly and authentically cares about. Number 2, the attention that the ad received helped to lift sales at Patagonia significantly. Back then, buy more of our stuff. Now, don't buy this jacket. Patagonia is making life for its competition harder and more difficult by being radically transparent around their supply chain. On the company's website, we found an interactive map of the extensive supply chain. For each cog, for each factory, we can find out how long they've worked for Patagonia, the gender ratio, how many people work there, which products are produced there. For each product on their site, we can find out where and how it's been produced. Back then, leaving consumers in the dark, now being radically transparent around our supply chain. Shift number 3, tough on results, tender on people, compassionate and accountable, is exemplified by one of Patagonia's benefits, on-site childcare. And it has been from the very beginning, when they parked a truck in front of their first shop so that the then head of marketing could retreat somewhere to nurse her colicky baby. The program has never been cut, even in times of economic hardship. As a direct result of the on-site childcare, Patagonia has a staff turnover that's an unheard 4%, which is less than 30% of the industry average. What's more impressive, nearly 100% of new moms return back to work at Patagonia. Compare this to the average population of 65%. Back then, letting young moms fend for themselves, now taking care of young families. As we all know, there is no better way than leading by example. Shift number 4, eyes on, hands off, is exemplified by how the founder Chouinard spends his summers. Every summer, even back when he was CEO, he takes 3 months, goes to Jackson Hole, rents a place, goes fishing every day. He probably calls in 3 to 5 times. In his words, if the warehouse burns down, don't call me. What can I do? You know what to do. Chouinard has been a lifelong surfer, and he doesn't let his business get between himself and some great waves. And the same goes for his people. It's in fact company policy at Patagonia that we drop work, we go surfing when the surf comes up. Chouinard has even written a book about his business philosophies, appropriately named Let My People Go Surfing. Back then, stealing 5 minutes in the cafeteria to grab a sandwich for lunch, I know something we all face, to now let my people go surfing. It goes without saying that we need strong and capable people surrounding ourselves to pull this off. And in fact, the staff at Patagonia is known for their independence and their initiative. When you're interviewing for a job at Patagonia, the first question you'll likely be asked is, so, what drew you here? A good response is something like, I'm really concerned about the environment and I want to do something about it. Environmental activism is deeply ingrained in the culture at Patagonia. But that's not enough. You need to bring something new and different to the organization. So what does Patagonia do? When they're screening resumes of candidates, they screen from the bottom up. The first thing they look at is additional passions, interests, and hobbies. by screening for these additional passions, interests, and hobbies, Patagonia avoids hiring the same person over and over again. Patagonia is hiring for cultural add, not just cultural fit. Hiring for cultural add, not just cultural fit. Champion of the culture at Patagonia by hiring people that are in line with our mission and at the same time bring something new and different to the organization. Now, we might not all agree with Patagonia's environmental activism, and most of us are not nearly as outdoorsy as your average Patagonian, and I know I poured a lot of juice into the Patagonia story. The lesson remains though. Patagonia achieved its amazing success from very modest beginnings by applying themselves radically and at times unapologetically to the 5 then to now shifts. The founder, Gunnar, clearly is a gifted leader and a highly capable man. He's also, as you must have seen on the book cover here, a self-proclaimed reluctant businessman. If a self-proclaimed reluctant businessman can rise to extraordinary success by applying himself to the 5 then to now shifts, then doing exactly that is within the reach of all of us. So now we will go into our leadership sprint, our last exercise. Let me first explain to you what feed forward is. I bet you have a hunch already. Let's first talk about feedback. What's feedback? Feedback is backwards looking. It's about the past. It's hopefully constructive criticism. You didn't really show up well in that meeting, or that email was really well written. So it's backwards looking. Do we enjoy giving or receiving feedback? Some of us more than others. It's still useful. Why do we look back? We look back to learn. Feedback is backwards looking. Feed forward, on the other hand, is forward looking. It's suggestions for the future. We can't do anything about the past. That's a feedback. Feed forward is suggestions for you on what you can do better in the future. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Feed forward. So here is the assignment to all of you. I'm going to walk you through here. Remember at the beginning I said pick one goal, one habit, something you want to get better at as a leader. I then need all of you to get up out of your seats when I say ready and walk around the room and spend 2 minutes with 3 people. So you'll meet 3 people for 2 minutes each. During these 2 minutes, you give feed forward suggestions for the future on their goal, and you will receive feed forward on your goal. Let me model this for you briefly. So let's say I get together with Tiffany. Tiffany is working on becoming a better listener, and I'm working on becoming a better delegator. So we get together, and Tiffany asks, so what do you want to work on, Urs? I say, okay, I want to become a better delegator. What feed forward suggestions do you have for me? She goes, better delegator. Clearly define deliverables, timelines, resist to take projects back, have check-in meetings, so you resist the urge to check in constantly. I say, anything else? She says, no, that's it. Done. No discussion, no context. Then we reverse. So Tiffany, she's working on becoming a better listener. She asks, so Urs, what feed-forward suggestions do you have for me? I say, better listener, make eye contact, paraphrase, don't interrupt, put your phone back, put your phone down, watch your body language. Anything else? No, that's it. Rapid fire, no conversation, no context. We provide feed forward to each other. 3 people, 2 minutes each. So this is rapid fire. At the end of this exercise, you should have a bunch of feed forward suggestions written down that other people gave you. The rules: you ask, what feed forward do you have for me? You listen, you thank, you move on. Okay, so that's the assignment for the next 10 minutes. And it's important, and I'm going to say go in a second, for the room leads to make sure that people get out of their seats and walk around. So 3 people, 2 minutes, let's go. So how was this for everybody? For most people, this is actually a positive exercise. Why? I'm not criticizing what you did in the past. I'm not giving you feedback. Even if I give you positive feedback, there's nothing we can do about the past. I simply give and receive suggestions for the future. There's no judgment attached to it, and it's amazing how useful this exercise can be, even if we have very little context around the realities of the other person. Feed forward, as we implement it with our teams, is forward-looking. It's suggestions for the future, and hence, for most people, this is a very positive experience. Thank you, everybody, for participating. I hope that you learned something useful from your colleagues in your rooms. And I know for those of us who are by ourselves, I hope you're able to do this or incorporate the feed forward concept throughout the next days and weeks and months in the office. As we slowly wrap up here, I would love to continue the conversation. I would love to hear from you what resonated, what didn't resonate maybe, what you find challenging, which shift you're interested to go deeper. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to continue the conversation around the 5 shifts of then to now leadership and how they apply to your teams and to OSF as a whole. As we slowly wrap up here is my invitation and my challenge to all of us. While these shifts are still fresh in our minds, let's over the next 3 days, actually over the next 5 days, because there's a weekend in there, over the next 5 days, commit to one action, one shift, ever so small. It might simply be stop doing something that's not serving me well anymore. Over the next 3 or 5 days, one shift, one action, we can all do that. Let me end with this. Our world is changing at an alarming rate. The challenges we're facing at OSF are difficult. The challenges we're facing as OSF mission partner leaders have never been more challenging. But I'm also believe that the opportunity for growth for us as healthcare leaders have never been more exciting. Let's all tackle these challenges head on. Let's all embrace this new reality by shifting the way we lead in our families, our communities, and at OSF. Let's all, right here, right now, shift our leadership from then to now. If you can do that, if I can do that, if we can all do that together, then I'm convinced our finest days as healthcare leaders are still ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Urs, for your poignant message. On behalf of all of the leaders that have gotten to receive this message, I think you have provided some really actionable and really connected next steps for all of our leaders here at OSF. Sometimes we just need something to get us started, and you have made this really tangible and brought it down to a level that we can connect to. So thank you. Just a little bit of housekeeping information as we get ready to dismiss for lunch. Room leads, we will be collecting questions that leaders may have for Urs. So if you could collect those questions prior to your folks leaving for lunch and drop them in the chat. Urs will be joining us for the first few minutes of our return from lunch so that we can ask him, elevate a few of those questions or any themes that may be arising among the questions that are shared. And then we will pray and we will dismiss for lunch. We will come back promptly at 12:30 Central, 1:30 Eastern from lunch. So if all see fit, let's bow our heads and we'll pray for lunch. All right, welcome back. Urs, are you present?
I am here, yes.
Awesome. Well, welcome back and thank you for agreeing to answer a couple questions for our leaders. And so of the questions that came through, I'm going to elevate a couple of them. The first one was shared by Kiana Ringer, and let me find it. The question was, what is a suggestion for a leader that is 100% on board with the leader funeral and radical transparency, but your one-up leader doesn't believe in it? And I think that can also extend to mission partners that are maybe not believers as well. What advice would you give to that leader?
Well, that's a $100 million question, isn't it? Right? So when our boss is not actually buying into what we strongly believe is the right thing to do. So there's no easy answers. I'm going to be upfront and honest about this. So a couple of thoughts. How clear am I about the goals of our bosses, of my boss? So in other words, let's first have clarity. And I'm always surprised when I talk to leaders. So what's your boss's goals? What's your boss's priorities? People often really can't answer that. So let's be clear. What does my boss actually want to achieve and want to focus on? And then is there possibility to maybe carve out a small project on a small scale where you can do it the way you see it fit? And then can you have that conversation with your boss? And then can you present business results which hopefully can change the boss's minds? But just to be clear, leadership from below, it is tough. So and if nothing helps, that's maybe a crucial conversation, where you need to really sit down and be honest with your boss and with yourself around what's important to you and how you see things fit. But again, I'm coming back to, let's first have clarity on what the boss's goals are and how might we actually, with different approaches, achieve that goal.
Wonderful. I love that. I'm hearing you say, in some ways, model that radical transparency by having that conversation and getting clear with your boss. And I think that's a great way to start by modeling anything that you're asking of those who report to you as well. All right, I will share another question with you. This one was shared by TJ Nelson. And so to frame this a bit, in your presentation, you shared about shifting culture, how the firefighters had dinner together, and that was part of how they built their culture. And TJ's question is, how is the then to now impacted with the increase in remote and hybrid work within our team? So obviously, we can't have dinner together, and some of that is impacted by remote work. So how is that shifting your then and now framework?
So that's once again a great question. And to be totally humble and honest, there's plenty smarter people than me thinking about this very hard, right? So what's the right mix of how people are together and how they're hybrid? I do think, there is data actually showing that strong cultures through COVID actually became stronger. So businesses and organizations that had strong cultures, they became stronger, and businesses and organizations that were already weak further weakened. But let's just be clear, even in strong culture organizations, there have been things that have fallen through the cracks. So I think the best advice that I can give around navigating, and this is all work in progress for all of us, this hybrid versus in-person world, is let's be very, very thoughtful and very thoughtful about if and how we bring our people together in person. We all know you can be very efficient at home or in the home office by yourself. You're super efficient, but what sometimes then doesn't happen is the effectiveness, right? As a team, we can become less effective because we're less together in person. And so the way I think about this is be incredibly thoughtful, and when you decide to bring people together, and do it in a like you do it here, actually in a virtual setting, even with clear intentions, with a clear purpose. So that's, and I'll be honest with you. I mean, this question people are grappling at Apple, at Google, like all over the place in governments. So this, has to play out over the next few years.
Awesome. Thank you. I think the word that I heard is intention, and I think that it's important that that carries through all of our work. Again, Urs, I want to thank you so much for the time that you spent with us. Thank you for seeing fit to share your morning with us and to impart us with so much knowledge and wisdom. Thank you so much, and have a great day. We appreciate
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And if I may, can I take just a few seconds?
Sure.
And then I promise I'll be done, because there was a question there, a very personal question around how I feel my demeanor may have changed over time. And if that's okay, just I want to share a personal note, and then I'll let you move on with your afternoon.
Sure.
So when I was in my 30s, I was much more black and white. I was frankly much more judgmental than I'm now. And the question was, has your service sort of changed you? And yes, it has. But you know what has changed me even more? Parenting. It's the most humbling experience of my life, the hardest job I ever loved. And so I am becoming a much softer, a much less judgmental person because of all these experiences. And the way this shows up in a work environment is, I was deployed to the Middle East, as it was shared last year. My boss was a super nice guy, but between you and I, he was not very competent. In my 30s, I would have banged my head against the wall. I would have gone, oh my God, this can't be. Like, how is it that I have such an incompetent boss? But now I learned my job is to make him and us look good. How can I make us, him look good? So anyway, I wanted to close on that personal note. Thank you so much for letting me share that. And it was such a pleasure to meet all of you virtually, and have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Thank you so much.